I hear a lot of people that, anxiety is helping them. It's kind of revving them up or preparing them for something, like performance anxiety, thinking, yeah, this is just gearing me up. And what is the evidence around that?
Yeah, there is, thanks to the internet, there are a lot of websites and even books written about how anxiety is helpful for performance. Yet when you look at the data, there's no science that shows that that's true. So there's an inverse relationship between anxiety and performance. The more anxious somebody is, the worse they perform. Just watch the Olympics, the more anxious somebody is, the worse they perform. Now, there's this myth that's called the Yerkes-Dodson law, because that, it's been mythologized so much, that goes back to a study from 1908 in Japanese dancing mice. I'm not kidding. And long story short, I write in detail about this in my Unwinding anxiety book. Long story short is that people kind of took this study of mice that was about arousal, like how aroused they are, like how much, you basically rev them up, and there's this inverted U-shaped curve where if they're asleep, they're not going to perform well. Duh.
Right.
And if they're totally, I don't know how, they shock them a bunch of times or whatever, but when they totally freak them out, they also don't perform very well. Shock, doesn't. Right. So, but when they're kind of awake and alert, they can perform better than at either of these extremes. So this inverted U-shaped curve, they called this the Yerkes-Dodson law. And people started to extrapolate that to anxiety without any evidence. And I think thanks to two things. One is that our brains are really good at making associations. So, if we're anxious, that's true. And we happen to perform well, it's true. We make this causal connection where our brains say, oh, because I was anxious, I performed well. That's that myth of cause, correlation does not equal causation.
Right.
Is the one liner on that. So because the two are correlated, our brain links the two and says, oh, that must have caused this. But until we step back and ask, well, was that true? Or did they just happen to be, present at the same time? Especially if somebody's anxious all the time.
Yes.
Their anxiety must be causing everything.
Everything. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, and we can see pretty clearly that that's not true. So we can look at that and see that our brains like to make these correlations into causal inferences, and that's not true. We have to prove causality. And we can also look at the opposite when we are performing at our best. And I've never met anybody that says they perform at their best when they're really anxious, or even when they're moderately anxious. People report when they're in flow, that's their optimal performance mode. When they're, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi described flow as effortless, joyful, it's selfless. Like we are so immersed in the moment, so merged with the doing of whatever we're doing, that we're not even thinking about ourselves. So you can't possibly be anxious if you're not worried about yourself.
Right.
So there's more evidence to just show that, there's no causal connection between anxiety and performance. In fact, the evidence suggests the opposite. And we can just ask ourselves, when do I perform at my best? And it's not when we're anxious.
Yeah.
Our brains like to, it's kind of like they hold up this badge of anxiety. It's like, oh my, and we get attached to the anxiety. We get identified with it. And we think, oh, I need my anxiety.
Yes.
And then come up with reasons to hold on to it.
Yes.
It's unfortunate. It's not, it's not anybody's fault. It's just how our brains work. And the good news there is when we start to see how our brains work, we can start to put our brains to work for us instead of getting pulled along by them and stuck in these anxiety habit loops.
Yeah.